Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer, and today's guest is Scott M. Greer again. So I hope you guys enjoyed the last time. I had a nearly hour-long monologue with myself, and I know you people always say that I talk too much on my show, so today I will be, once again, the only person who talks. So sit back, relax, and enjoy my lovely voice coming over your speakers. So today we've got a lot of topics to talk about. First up, I want to talk about the Senate, the Georgia runoffs, and what this all means for the GOP and Trump. So yesterday was a very bad day for the GOP-controlled Senate. You know, we keep hearing about, we've got to keep the Senate. The apocalypse is going to happen if the Democrats get a one-vote majority. They're going to napalm your homes. They're going to steal your kids. It's going to be the worst thing to ever happen is if they get this one-vote majority. And the only thing that can stop this is if ordinary Trump voters show up in January to vote for Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue. They're the only thing standing in between us and the apocalypse. This is the message they're going with. So yesterday we see what a GOP Senate looks like and what they do. And it's not necessarily preventing the apocalypse, and it doesn't seem like it's really standing up for middle Americans. So there were two things that happened. First was Senator Jim Inhofe of Oklahoma, who is the Armed Service Committee chairman, informing the public that two big wishes that Trump wanted in a massive defense bill, which they're going to pass anyway, but Trump decided to put two wishes in there that would enact an America First agenda, would not be included. The two wishes were, first, that they would strip language that would totally eliminate any Confederate names or monuments or commemorations from defense facilities. So it would rename military bases named after Confederate generals. If there was like any Confederate commemoration in a national cemetery, it'd be removed. It completely wipe out Southern heritage from anything involved in the Defense Department or national ceremonies and everything like that. So that's one. It's, we're not going to protect Southern heritage. We're not going to protect American heritage in this bill. And second, Trump insisted on putting in a provision that would eliminate Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which protects big tech from publisher liabilities under the pretense they act as neutral forums that do not censor political speech. Of course, they do not operate as neutral forums, and they censor political speech all the time. So why do they get this protection? And why don't Republicans want to go after it? Now, Inhofe said that he wants to do something about Section 230, but we can't do it in a defense bill. This is just too important. We've got to keep the money train flowing for the military-industrial complex no matter what. It doesn't matter about ordinary Americans. It just matters what the Pentagon and these Raytheon and Boeing want. That's what matters, not ordinary concerns of Trump voters. That's what Jim Inhofe told the nation. So this is the first thing. This is a powerful Republican who's the chairman of a powerful committee who has this position due to the GOP retaining the Senate majority, saying we're not going to actually advocate for Trumpist positions or conservative positions. We're just simply going to go along, get along, and fortify the status quo as we're here. So, not necessarily a great message for all those people who keep warning of the apocalypse if the Democrats manage to gain a one-vote Senate majority. And the second thing they did, which is even worse than that, is that the Senate, which has a GOP Senate majority, want to remind everyone, unanimously passed the horrific Fairness for High-Skilled Immigrants Act. And of course, it's not about fairness or helping out high-skilled immigrants. It allows India to totally monopolize their system. The Fairness for High-Skilled Immigrants Act, S-386, it'll probably be easier to say that than spell out the whole title. It eliminates country caps on nations. And right now, there's like a 7%, from each nation, there's about a 7% cap on them. It's like only one nation can get 7% of all green cards issued every year. Well, there's a massive backlog of hundreds of thousands of Indians who are all wanting to come here, but due to the, there's a cap on India, only 7% of them can come every year. They're not getting in. So they've been demanding for this for a long time, and this is a bill that is massively supported by the Indian lobby and big tech. And, it originally began last year. The House overwhelmingly passed it by a strong majority. I believe only 59 Republicans voted for it, or around that number, or voted against it, rather. And a lot of, well-known immigration patriots are people who are pretty hawkish on the issue, such as Matt Gaetz even voted for it. So when it went to the Senate, for whatever reason, it's very curious. Mike Lee is one of the chief champions of it, and the Democratic lead sponsor is one Kamala Harris. So this really gives you an idea of how great the bill is. For whatever reason, the bill sponsors in the Senate didn't want to have a debate on it. That's why they insisted on a unanimous voice consent, which would bypass debate, and it would go straight to reconciliation with the House and then go to the president. They didn't want to have a debate on this or allow this bill to go through the normal Senate process. So for about a year and a half, it's been stuck because there'd be one senator, and it only takes one senator to voice opposition to stop it. There has been one senator who has voiced complaints, and they've had to amend it. First person to do that was Rand Paul. He had complaints because it wasn't helping out Filipino health workers enough. Well, they created a cutout for them. Then David Perdue, who, of course, as we'll get to in a moment, is in a heated Senate runoff down in Georgia. He had complaints, but not for, worries about the American worker. It was also concerned about foreign workers, but his concerns were alleviated in the process. Then Dick Durbin wanted more liberal provisions in there and wanted, there to be a greater giveaway for green cards, and he was ameliorated. And, he began supporting the bill. But the last person to hold up the bill was, surprisingly, Rick Scott, who is a strong establishment senator, no charisma. He's not particularly known for any hawkish views on immigration. He held up the bill because it would have hurt Hispanic immigrants. This really just shows the multiculturalism at work here. Everyone is fighting for various ethnic lobbies outside of the middle American in this bill. Whether it's Filipinos or Cubans, this is what really matters to these senators. So anyway, this is why he was voting, pushing against it. And when he pushed against it, the Indian lobby came out very strongly against him. They called him a Klansman. There was this really cheap Photoshop of him with his face, and he's looking exasperated, and there's a Klan hood over him, over Rick Scott, and they're like, no, Rick Scott is a Klansman because he's not going against our interests. So, and even the Daily Caller wrote up a hit piece on him and critics of the bill because, oddly enough, is Neil Patel, who's the publisher of the Daily Caller, sits on the board of one of the chief lobbying agents for this bill. Not disclosed in the article at all, but something worth noting. And this also shows that conservative media and a lot of conservatives didn't care about the bill because they didn't want to go against the Indian lobby and big tech interests, who both demanded that this bill be passed. So Rick Scott had been opposing this, and it looked like in the late summer and early fall that the bill was dead due to Rick Scott's opposition. He wrote an op-ed, I believe, in August, saying I will never vote for this bill. This bill is done. It's not serving. And he said in pretty good terms that most America First conservatives would, agree with. He was saying that it hurts American workers and there's national security concerns. Well, yeah, he was, but he, of course, they met him halfway and he got what he wanted, which they added amendments saying, they would cap the amount of H-1B visa holders who would be able to get green cards who are primarily Indian. I guess that's good, but really this bill has long-term consequences, and I'm not even sure if that's going to hold up in court. And the real thing that's going to be challenged in court is that one of Rick Scott's amendments bars Chinese nationals with ties to the Communist Party or the Chinese military from obtaining a green card or obtaining permanent or being able to apply for a visa status change that would allow them to stay permanently. That's likely not going to hold up. I have a feeling that probably will not hold up in court if they're allowing all these other people with ties to other various groups, especially from India. If they have ties to the Nationalist Party there, they're going to probably, well, what's the difference between the BJP and the CCP? And of course, we'll see those arguments. In any case, these amendments are decent, but it does not overcome the serious problems with this bill. This bill is going to fundamentally change our immigration. We already have plenty of Indians who are coming here or taking middle-class jobs. Now there's going to be even more, and this is going to be the priority. So you're going to see even more Indians coming here, and that many H-1B visa workers who are working here, replacing American jobs, are going to be able to permanently stay now thanks to this bill. This bill hurts American workers, it hurts the American middle class, and it does nothing for our national interest. But they all these Republicans support it because it helps big business, it helps these ethnic lobbies who they don't want to get complained about, they don't want to be called a Klansman or a racist, and they're so worried about this group that only makes up about 1% of the population. That's about roughly the Indian proportion of our population, but it will certainly grow under this bill. They're so worried about them that they refuse to stand up for this bill. And many of the immigration hawks have been missing in action on this bill. Tom Cotton and David Perdue supported the bill. And as we mentioned, David Perdue gave his reasons why, because they met him halfway on these, and they decided to appease him by helping out Filipina health workers. And then that was his similar concern that he had with Rand Paul. And then Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley, Josh Hawley wants to make himself out to be this grand national populist who's going to really stand up for middle America's interests. He didn't say anything about this. Now, I would say, in fairness to Tom Cotton and Josh Hawley, is they both strongly stood up against the defense bill and insisted that it would protect Southern heritage in, its language, which, of course, they stood up against the amendment that would eliminate Southern heritage from our military bases and our military sites. And this was proposed by Elizabeth Warren. And for some reason, a lot of Republicans want to support something that Elizabeth Warren supports. And they did stand up against it, but they showed no energy and no opposition towards the Fairness for High Skilled Immigrants Act. So now the bill's fate lies in the hands of President Trump. Will he veto it? Will he not? Or will he support it? Will he cater to big tech and the Indian lobby in this matter? It's too hard to say what he'll do in this. There was an interview a few months back where Stephen Miller was asked about this bill. He was non-committal, and he said that the president would never, sign a bill that would hurt American workers when addressed to it. It was very vague and ambiguous that allowed an opening for supporting the bill, but it also at the same time showed that this president wasn't outright supporting it. And the president is trying to secure his legacy on immigration right now. If you look at what his, push in, whatever happens with the election, he's very much, in December trying to push through actions through executive order on immigration. He may possibly scrap birthright citizenship. He's going to make it harder to gain citizenship and a few other measures. So he's definitely trying to fortify his image as a supreme immigration hawk in this month. So I don't know why he would particularly sign this bill. I mean, this bill is bad. I mean, there is going to be a backlash against it. We are waiting. There is a good chance that Tucker Carlson and other Fox News hosts are going to rail against it. And, Trump's going to hear this and wonder what benefit he gains by signing this bill. And, if he, of course, unanimous vote, yeah, of course they can override the Trump veto, but as you're seeing with the Senate, they don't want to have a debate on the bill. So if he vetoes it, a lot of Republicans are probably going to say, hey, wait a minute, I don't really support this bill. Let's have a debate on it. And for whatever reason, the bill sponsors and Mike Lee and Kamala Harris don't want to have that conversation. They don't want to have a debate on the bill. So him, by vetoing it or holding off on it, could very much derail this bill. We'll have to see what happens. It's too hard. It's too early to say what Trump will do. I want to see what Fox News' primetime lineup does and says about that before making a conclusion on it. If Fox News is coming out against it, if Tucker Carlson is delivering monologues about it, I don't think Trump will support the bill. So that's just my opinion on it. All these things happening in the Senate are probably happening for the worst time for Republicans. As I was saying previously, the Republicans continue to warn about the Democratic apocalypse if ordinary Trump voters don't show up in January for the Georgia runoffs. And that there will be terrible things you won't even imagine. We won't go over them. People don't want to have their house invaded by socialists again if the Democrats gain their one vote majority. So this pitch is fully undermined by the actions we saw on Wednesday with the GOP. It's like, what again are people actually voting for? They're warning about all these dangers that could happen with the, Democrats controlling the Senate and the House and Congress. And we've witnessed this before, and they've had a supermajority in these chambers before. And you're wondering, well, what can they possibly pass? Now, there is the fear that they may eliminate the filibuster, but Joe Manchin has said he would never vote for that. And he made many public pronouncements and interviews saying he would angrily refuting any accusations he would ever vote to override the filibuster. And Kirsten Sinema, who's also trying to make herself out to be a moderate, probably wouldn't do it as well. Mark Kelly in Arizona, who has to run again in 2022, probably doesn't want to vote for it either. And even these suggestions of court packing and other things. I mean, court packing proved politically unpopular. It's why Biden would never talk about it on the campaign trail. And they have completely forgotten about the idea. You know, they're just ignoring that they ever suggested the idea before. I don't think they're going to court pack. I don't think they're going to override the filibuster. I just think Biden realizes it's going to be too brutal a fight and it'll hurt moderates, so he doesn't really particularly want to do that. And Biden is coming out in this, you know, portraying himself in this image of the great mediator who's going to bring everybody together, and we're going to work on bipartisan legislation under him. You know, eliminating the filibuster totally dispenses with that image. You know, he's not healing the country. He's further strengthening our partisan divisions and further, you know, balkanizing people along these very political lines. So why would he do that? I mean, of course, it would be to his political advantage to do that, and the whole media would champion him and clap and cheer, like, yes, get rid of the filibuster. Yes, court pack. This is necessary because Republicans stole all these Supreme Court seats and due to the Russian hack in 2016, so they're all illegitimate. And impeach them too. You know, so they would go along with whatever crazy ideas they suggested. I mean, they fully support, I mean, the media fully supports defunding the police, abolishing ICE. All these things would make Americans far less safe. I mean, they're going to go along with any crazy idea. But, I mean, what the media says isn't necessarily what the American public says. And a lot of these radical extreme ideas he knows would hurt them in the midterm elections in 2022 and the 2024 presidential election. So if you want to do that, and we have to keep in mind, this is if, you know, Biden becomes president. There's still the chance that Trump could pull this off. So we have to keep that in mind as well. But the main pitch that GOP is giving to its voters is saying Biden is the president. We can't do anything to help Trump. And, you know, you have to vote for the Republicans to ensure that, you know, Biden doesn't institute this Armageddon, legislative Armageddon through the Senate. The one main advantage of the GOP having the majority, and I said this last week, is it does reduce the chances that an amnesty will pass. Chuck Grassley, who is pretty decent on immigration, he signed the moratorium letter, or the letter urging for the president to expand and extend his immigration moratorium this year. He would be the chair of the Senate Immigration Committee. He'd not likely allow any of these terrible amnesty proposals to get through. And also, you know, they would have the majority. I mean, it would be impossible for them to negotiate a deal as we saw in 2013 with the Gang of Eight amnesty. And, you know, there would be Trump there to chirp and to tell the GOP to not vote for any stupid bill such as this. So I don't really see that really necessarily happening if they did gain the majority. You know, the chances still aren't even good if they have those one vote majority. The Democrats are much more divided on this issue now. They don't want to give anything for border security or anything that would be considered fascist in terms of immigration enforcement. So I don't really see that, you know, really happening either. Like Democrats and Republicans would be more united in opposition towards it. You know, there's not this huge push to demand the GOP needs to get amnesty in order to win Hispanic votes. I mean, they had a historic, record performance among Hispanics in 2020 with the guy who began his campaign saying that they're all drug dealers, criminals, and rapists. So, you know, that's what you have to keep in mind. In any case, you know, the GOP down in Georgia is not making the case for amnesty. You know, you're not hearing about immigration at all from Kelly Loeffler or David Perdue, even though they're very eager. They're very insistent that the GOP base has to turn out for them, even though, and this is the issue that drew the base towards Trump and kept them loyal to Trump, was the immigration issue. And it's, you know, nowhere in sight. It's missing in action. And so we have Kelly Loeffler talking about how we need a Republican Senate majority to act as a firewall against socialism. Joe Biden is not trying to institute socialism in America. And his whole cabinet is full of liberal globalists who love capitalism. I mean, look at Janet Yellen. Janet Yellen, is she a socialist? No, none of these people are. This is just silly. You want a firewall to protect against these horrible immigration policies that Joe Biden is making his number one priority in his first 100 days. What are you doing about that? And we're not hearing what Loeffler and Perdue are doing about that. Now, going down to Georgia, you could say, Loeffler are trying to win over these white suburbanites who who voted against Trump on election day. And that's why they're not talking about immigration. And these white suburbanites are worried that makes them sound racist. And they don't want to look racist if they vote for somebody who's talking about immigration. They have to look respectable for their neighbors. And Jose, who mows their lawn, is just so nice. How could anyone oppose immigration? And that's what a lot of these people in the Atlanta suburbs think. And so there is that argument that, well, they have to appeal to everybody. But at the same time, the base is really upset. And state party leaders continue to double down on attacking them. Last week, Raffensperger was demanding that the GOP condemn its own voters as a wild mob. He was like, we condemn the mob on the left, but there's also the mob on the right, and they keep sending mean tweets to me and my wife. Why won't someone condemn them? And then there's this election official who I believe was Republican. He's a short little chubby guy who stormed up to a podium at the state house and he ripped off his mask and he's like, I've had enough with these mean tweets. I keep getting threatened. Enough is enough. I've had enough. And then this guy is just like a little dork who's just like yelling at his own voters at the same time the GOP is demanding these same voters show up and like, oh, we need to stop. We need to have this firewall against socialism. Meanwhile, they have their own state party officials who are going up and at the point of tears crying out against their own voters at how mean they are and a lot of these people deserve the mean tweets and the mean messages because they totally bungled this election. They gave Stacey Abrams all of her election reforms, quote unquote reforms, that she wanted, and this allowed the Democrats to steal the state election. And they're not wanting to do anything about this. They're not calling for a state assembly to make these necessary election reforms to stop Democrats from stealing future elections. But they're still insisting, oh, yeah, we'll win the January runoffs. You might not if you keep allowing Stacey Abrams election proposals to continue and these loose regulations that allow Democrats to wiggle in and steal the presidential election. You're not going to win in January if you don't do anything about it. And, Lin Wood, who's the attorney who's represented Nick Sandmann, and he's currently representing Kyle Rittenhouse. He's kind of a firebrand on Twitter. I can't really say endorse all of his tweets. Sometimes he gets into QAnon territory, but whatever. I think he's well-intentioned, even though, he has some questionable aspects. He hosted a rally this week, and he called on the GOP. He said to Trump voters that, the GOP has not earned your vote. They are not, and you must insist that they earn your vote. And he called on the GOP state party leaders to demand a state assembly to pass serious election reforms. And if they don't do that, they have not earned the votes of ordinary Trump voters. So only give your vote if they do these necessary actions to prevent future steals. This is a reasonable request. He says that the GOP must do more and institute serious election reforms. I don't know why anyone would oppose that. And, their only argument against the state assembly is like, well, it's too expensive and it's too much work. We're going to have lawsuits. That's what Brian Kemp is saying. And, so they're not trying to earn the vote of Trump voters. And all these people, instead of saying, well, this is a reasonable request, why isn't the GOP doing that? They all went into attack mode on Lin Wood. There was, Breitbart's a good website. I don't want to attack Breitbart too much. But, when I went to their homepage yesterday, and this is the same day that, the GOP betrayed Trump on the defense bill and passed the Fairness for High Skilled Immigrants Act, which Breitbart has been heavily covering and has had great coverage on. I go around there at 8 p.m., it'd been about an hour or so after the Fairness for High Skilled Immigrants Act had passed. And I look at the front page and it's all about Lin Wood being a former Democrat. That's at the top of the page. It's like secret Democrat operative, Lin Wood? Question mark. I'm like, yeah, the Democrats paid him to represent Nick Sandmann and Kyle Rittenhouse. I really believe this theory. He may have been a Democrat in the past. He probably made some questionable donations. And I don't think you should necessarily say Lin Wood is a hero and accept everything he says at face value. And of course, there may be some ulterior motives to some of his things. But the point he made at the rally was reasonable. And I don't know why anyone in the GOP or ordinary conservatives would oppose it. Why don't you want to pass these serious election reforms? Why won't the GOP call for this at special assembly? Why is the burden on these ordinary Trump voters who are not involved in politics on their day-to-day lives? Why is the burden on them rather than state party leaders to do what's right? I don't understand that, and I think it's wrong to attack Lin Wood for being the messenger. But that's what they're going with, and they're trying to claim Lin Wood's a Democratic operative. They were really worried about that rally he hosted, Stop the Steal rally, and he told GOP voters, a lot of them, what they heard, and they cheered him on. I mean, a lot of people feel like this. They feel like their vote was stolen, that their voice is being suppressed, and the GOP is doing nothing to step up for the president. Now, Loeffler and Perdue are doing things necessary. They are, or I wouldn't say necessarily necessary, but they are standing up for the president. They are calling for the Secretary of State, Raffensperger, who's awful, to resign. They are demanding a thorough recount, which the state isn't necessarily giving them, and they are in a tough pickle, situation that they're in right now. So you don't necessarily want to condemn that too much, but if you look at the governor, the lieutenant governor, and the Secretary of State, they're all spending all their time attacking Trump supporters. They're not doing anything to protect the election, and this party itself is making all these demands and name calling and attacking and condescending to ordinary Trump voters and calling them idiots and morons and incels and Q-tards because they want serious election reform. So you have to question these motives. And if the GOP loses in January, it's not Trump's fault, it's their fault. It's their own fault for doing this. They didn't resolve these issues with the elections to make them safer. They're not pitching an effective message to their voters to show why they deserve the Senate majority. And, they're not doing a good job standing up for Trump. All these people who are demanding these Georgia voters, go out and vote in January are also insisting Trump must concede. And this is awful that he won't concede. Our democracy depends on him conceding. And, the message is being received loud and clear by the base. And there's already problems with the Georgia runoffs prior to all this concern trolling against Trump. There's been articles in National Review saying that if they lose, it's all Trump's fault for alleging that there's election fraud, which, as we've seen, there is, for daring to say this, that he's going to cost them the election, for, having the audacity to wonder why his voters, voices weren't counted on election day. So they're already trying to blame him for this. But as I said last week in a tweet and on this show, if the GOP wanted to secure their Senate majority, they could easily insist on a proper recount that would recount both the presidential election and the Senate races in Georgia, and it would likely show that David Perdue and Trump won the state, but for whatever reason, they don't want to do that. David Perdue was, as I said previously, he was only needed to increase his margin by around 15,000 votes to win outright, and if they insisted on a proper recount, a proper audit of the whole election, they would probably find those numbers. But for whatever reason, they don't want to do that, and they want to risk it all on this Senate runoff. And despite all the concern trolling against Trump, as I was saying, there were problems already going into this before everyone was complaining about Trump. I talked to some people who are on the ground and heard sources that they were very much concerned that they were going to lose. This is all before they were blaming Trump, because there would be a high black turnout for Raphael Warnock, who is a popular minister. He's the minister at Martin Luther King's old church, and they really see him as this great hero for the community. So they're all going to turn out for him, which they wouldn't have had for John Ossoff, who's this goofy little guy who, of course, is not connecting with the blacks in Georgia. I mean, they're having to force. They don't see him. They don't see themselves in John Ossoff, but they definitely see that in Raphael Warnock. So they already had these problems before, and they're not helping their cause at all by making it easier for the Democrats to steal the election. And they're, in many ways, they're depressing their own vote by continuing to attack them, demanding that the party condemn their own voters and give up on tackling election fraud and forget about the issues they actually care about and just talk about socialism and liberty. I guess maybe they'll worry about the tax cuts too. Maybe they could talk about regulations and how the Democrats aren't spending enough on the military-industrial complex. That'll really get the base out. So, to repeat, if Republicans lose in January in the Georgia Senate runoffs, it's the establishment's fault. It's not Trump's fault, and Trump did everything possible to win. And Trump is going to Georgia this weekend to rally for Loeffler and Perdue. He's, of course, is fully in favor of them. He doesn't like all the talk about, boycotting the vote. He sent out tweets saying that he stands with them. His son, Don Jr., and that political rap apparatus around Don Jr. is very much about winning the Georgia runoffs. And it appears they may have been the sources behind the attacks on Lin Wood. Whatever the cause, it appears Trump is supporting them. But even with Trump's support, the GOP establishment is still going to blame him at the end. And, on the final word on Georgia, I still think it's better for us, for the GOP to gain that Senate majority, but it's not the end of the world. And I do understand the GOP needing a message. I really think Cocaine Mitch McConnell with his Senate majority really needs to hear a message that, we are not going to go along with the same old. We're not going to return to Paul Ryanism. We want Trump. We want Trumpism. And that's the final word. And maybe the only way they'll hear that is if base doesn't turn out for them in the Georgia runoffs. So, that's not exactly necessarily what I'm advocating for, even though I wish I was the number one voice in Georgia Republican politics. I'm not. But with with my audience, with my reach, I think that the voters should demand serious promises from Loeffler and Perdue, and they should have a state party that works to enact election reform rather than giving up and saying it's too expensive. So that's my final word on Georgia. And now moving along to whether the GOP is the multiracial, multi-ethnic, working class party now. So I want to begin this segment on Tucker Carlson. A lot of people are giving him a ton of grief right now for supposedly betraying Trump, not showing enough support for Trump, not showing enough support for the election fraud narrative, and otherwise having a lackluster show segments. So, I kind of understand a lot of this grief they're coming from. Some people are taking it a little bit too far and saying Trump is a total traitor and or not Trump, but Tucker himself is a traitor and death to Tucker. Tucker is dead to me. So some people are saying that. And I think one thing we need to keep in mind is that we can have disagreements with our allies. We can offer, some criticism toward them and express disagreement with them without declaring them all enemies. I think this is a big problem on the right, is that if there's ever some minor disagreement with someone, everyone's like, you're an enemy, you're a traitor, death to you, and they ignore the larger enemy of the left and just focus on this person on the right who pretty much shares 90% of what they believe in. But they decide they're an enemy over one issue, and that this one issue is non-negotiable, and then they go into a flame war, and the movement stays divided, as you could say. So I don't want to necessarily get into that. I think people can express disagreements with Tucker without declaring him an enemy or a traitor, and to realize that Tucker is ultimately an ally. He's pushing a nationalist message on a daily basis. He's good. We're glad he's hosting the 8 p.m. primetime slot. We wish he could do more to help Trump and to further election fraud narrative. But it is what it is. I think, in 2 months, he'll be back to, normal, giving out great monologues and, attacking the left and really furthering our message to millions of Americans. So I just want to keep that in mind. And on that note, I'm going to offer some mild disagreement with Tucker, or more rather something that he is helping to enable. This week he had a segment with a curious title about how elites are using identity politics to divide us, which sounds a little strange, but the segment was ultimately good. It was about the Louisville mayor who's declared racism a public health emergency and is urging more white privilege training and more handouts to blacks to compensate for this serious health emergency that several other mayors and governors and Democrats and other officials are also calling for health emergency to be declared on racism. I think even the American Medical Association also called for racism to be declared a public health emergency. So this is how insane we've gotten. And it's good that he covered that. A lot of other, primetime slots on other networks, of course, would never talk about it, or they would agree with it. So it's good that he's attacking and everything. But he is going into this point that identity politics doesn't matter. Identity isn't, it's just something for narcissists and it's something dividing the working class. And then he brought on Sagar and Jetty to talk about how liberals just want to elevate token minorities to say their point of view. And, well, Sagar and Jetty is a non-white former neocon who didn't vote for Trump in 2016. He was presenting himself as the uber national populist. Is the final word in national populism, even though he wants to move populism away from addressing identity and cultural issues to just focusing on economic topics. This messaging on identity politics, that it's dividing the working class and that ordinary Americans don't see color or race. They just see each other by their content of character, just as Martin Luther King Jr. intended. And this is a very popular messaging among conservatives. And, it is growing. The difference between past arguments for this is that it comes with this working class, supposedly populist messaging that the GOP is now the working class party. And several Republicans are now saying this. Josh Hawley said that we're the working class party now. Marco Rubio says we're now the multi-ethnic, multiracial working class party. Even Ted Cruz, who doesn't really engage with any of these populist ideas, says that the GOP is the working class party right now. And this has been a common refrain ever since Trump won in 2016. And it's led a lot of people to believe that what made Trump win in that election were economic policies, that it was like him promising to restore manufacturing and protect trade and infrastructure plans, industrial policy, these family tax credits. These were the things that supposedly made Trump win, not immigration, not cultural warfare. And in order for the GOP to survive, it has to ditch the identity issues, ditch the cultural warfare, ditch Trump's bombastic rhetoric, and come up with a respectable populism that promises, industrial policy to the heartland and these family tax credits that can lead to a pro-natalist health policy. Not saying that these are bad, but these are saying these are the core issues that animated Trumpism, and this is what made him win in 2016. Well, a new study disputes this and actually finds that it was the identity and cultural issues that animated Trumpism and were the key to victory in 2016. The study was conducted by two political scientists, Richard Hanania and George Hawley, of the newly formed think tank, the Center for the Study of Partisanship and Ideology. A very ambiguous title, but they promise to put out a lot of good work. I retweet Richard Hanani a lot. He has a lot of studies. Not all of his takes I can endorse. There's some really mega contrarian takes that are dunking on Trump and etc. But I like his research. Anyway, they put out this fantastic study, and I encourage most people to read it, that really pinpoints that cultural identity issues animated Trumpism. And here's what they concluded. I'm going to quote them. Quote, the data shows that most voters who supported Trump were overwhelmingly driven by culture rather than economic concerns. And another quote, the idea that there has been a major shift towards Republicans becoming the working class party is mostly a myth. Republican success in the future will depend on the party speaking to the cultural rather than economic concerns of its voters. And they found indicators that would show whether you would vote for Trump or not. And they assess income, education, which a lot of these national populist types really focus in on. They're saying that this is the working class party, so only people of a lower income bracket are voting for them. And it's not necessarily the case. It's not your income and education is not a good indicator of whether you will vote for Trump. What is your opinion on immigration. And it found that only 10% of people who had a favorable opinion of Trump would vote for him or would be likely to support him with him, while 80% who had a negative opinion of immigration would have been Trump voters. And the other indicators of huge Trump support includes opposition towards political correctness, openness towards white identity, and defining yourself as a Protestant, and other cultural attitudes. Obviously, economic concerns do motivate voters, but it is along broad lines, such as, what unemployment is looking like, whether there's inflation, whether there's economic growth. It's not on these specific wonky areas such as industrial policy or tax credits or anything like that. It's something that is very specific that they can understand when they're, in their ordinary home, leading their ordinary life. They'll understand if the inflation is going up or if unemployment is rising. Those are the issues that really matter to them. And it's not necessarily specific policies that promise them, greater equality or greater that necessarily fit the populist mold. It's anything that accomplishes low unemployment, high growth, and reasonable inflation rates, they're going to go along with. So that's what they recommend. And the two authors recommend that the GOP advocate for policies that achieve high economic growth and low unemployment, whether they're populist or not. And Richard Hanani made this argument in a tweet where he said that culture remains the center of our politics, which means that neither party is going to gain much by adopting a new economic agenda. Any hope of gaining an electoral windfall would have to be through leaning in on popular cultural positions or ultimately shifting the culture. And I largely agree with that. I think that there's been too much focus on these economic concerns, especially if you look at American Affairs with Julius Krein, and these people are trying to build a respectable national populism that scuttles all of the tawdry aspects in their minds about Trump, which the tawdry aspects made Trump. Like, people loved his tweets. People loved his bombastic rhetoric. People loved that he was willing to say things that no one else would say. Like, people are not upset that he would, call out, us losing our manufacturing base, which is an important issue. They were calling him out because they believed he was racist and he was attacking the news media and destroying our norms, and how dare you show this lack of respect for your fellow Americans, which to his base, they see these people as their mortal enemies. They want somebody who's going to be a champion for them and for their cause and defend the historic American nation, which Trump promised to do. We can argue whether he actually fully achieved it or not, or whether he sufficiently went about that as president. That's certainly an argument we can have, or a discussion we can have. But, that's how he campaigned on, and that's how he won in 2016, to retcon it to believing that it was all economic populism, and these economic concerns is what made Trump the president is wrong. And the future is not a multiracial, multi-ethnic working class party. The reason why Hispanics voted for Trump was because of his boisterous rhetoric, his machismo, his demonstration of himself as a strong man who will defend them from Black Lives Matter and chaos and disorder. He promised law and order. And the reason why they went into him was less so because of economic concerns, but of racial and cultural concerns. Conservatives in the past used to say that Hispanics are natural conservatives. Populist Inc. says they're natural populists. But the truth is they're just natural racists, and Trump understood that, and some people around him, and they appealed to him on the basis of being the one candidate who did not bend the knee before Black Lives Matter. And also, these same people are impacted by illegal immigration and mass immigration as well. They don't want to lose their job to low-skilled foreign labor either. So these things have to be kept in mind. And the future of the GOP lies within America First, not a multiracial, multi-ethnic working class party. As I was walking around the Million MAGA March, I saw a bunch of people who would have never recognized that phrase and would have never seen them a part of such a thing. So that's my final word on that. And now on to patron questions. So as a reminder, you too can get the power to ask me or the guest questions on Highly Respected if you sign up for the patron option at Highly Respected's Patreon. So the first question comes up from Tim. He asks, Scott, what do you think about the brown queen who defended white men at the Michigan election fraud hearing? Are Indians redeemed now? Well, I wouldn't say Indians are redeemed by this one woman, but it was a pretty epic moment. There was a woman who was there who worked as a poll worker in Michigan who was testifying to the fraud and irregularities that she was seeing. And she was going on about how she had this privilege. She used the word privilege of being a brown woman, that she could go in and observe and, challenge a lot of what the work these Democrats were doing, which whites and white men in particular didn't. And she said that they didn't have the privilege she had as being a brown woman to observe and to make necessary corrections in this case. And she was defending white men as like they were shut down, and they would be, if they made any point, they'd be told to quiet. Well, I could just say whatever I wanted. And I guess it was a very good point. And she went, this woman really went off in multiple ways. She, at one point, she was saying that all Chinese look alike to her, and that we need voter ID laws due to this because, a lot of these workers couldn't understand the differences between people. And she was making the point that ordinary Americans do have these things that we would call prejudices or politically incorrect views, but this is why we need voter ID and serious election reforms, which is a point that she was making. There was also a bald black woman who was like screaming about the witnesses and how they didn't have, they need to go under oath. They need to swear under oath that they're going to say this stuff. And the Indian woman said that she would say in the dead of the night, under oath in any circumstances what she said, because she knows this is the truth. And it was a pretty powerful moment. That was not the only highlight from the hearing. There was also this total Stacy who was possibly a bit inebriated. She was also, you'd say, quite well endowed. And she went up there and she had problem glasses on. She's like, yeah, I know what I saw. And they were committing fraud. And like the Democrats on the hearing were just not having it. They're like, what are you saying? The facts say otherwise. And then she's like, you know what? I signed something that says that I would go to jail if I lie. Did you? And this bald guy was clearly a beta who was just not having it. And when she said that, I don't need to do that. And so it's just like a total put down. But Rudy Giuliani at one point was like laughing alongside her as she was going off. So it was a pretty great content was to be had at the Michigan hearing. Once again, they are showing more proof that there were so many irregularities and so much fraudulent practices and really deception that was going on, that this really does cast the election in doubt. There is serious evidence. Whether anyone will act upon it remains to be seen. The institutions themselves have already decided that Joe Biden won this election. It doesn't matter what these witnesses are saying or what they're attesting to the fraud that they saw with their own two eyes. They've already said no fraud. Joe Biden's the president. Well, we're moving along. GOP establishment agrees with them. And I've said before is, Trump won the election. It was rigged against him. And the only reason he would lose or not gain his rightful victory is if the institutions betrayed him and stuck with Joe Biden against the will of the people. And a lot of what we're seeing now is that prediction coming to fruition. So we'll have to see what comes of it. I think these hearings are producing a lot of both great content and fruitful information that can go on for election challenges going forward. And we'll have to see what comes of it. The second question comes from EM. He asks, despite the institutional headwinds against it, one advantage America First has is being tech savvy. It seems like there would be room for a mobile app which basically curates and distills political primary candidate stances on the America First platform. Then it sends out repeated push notifications reminders close to primary elections, state level or national, on which candidates to vote in or out. It could be something as simple as an America First scorecard. So and he goes on about saying, like, what is your thoughts on building something like this? Well, I think it's a great idea. And a lot of people have talked about, having these type of scorecards to rate candidates on. Something like that you see from Numbers USA. A ton of conservative organizations do this. And, they rate them on the issues and say whether they're genuinely America First or not. This is a type of framework we need to develop over the coming years, because America First is not going away. In fact, it's inevitable. So in order to really achieve our gains, we have to be electing America First candidates. And, you know, a lot of these candidates, they're not necessarily going to be people who are fully, you know, immersed in our world, are fully aware of all these issues, but we can ensure that they're good on all the basic broad issues, like whether they're good on immigration, how they feel about Black Lives Matter, whether they're strong on law and order. Are they non-interventionists or interventionists? You know, what's their position on trade? These are the issues that we need to assess candidates on. And I think we do have the ability to create, you know, maybe not something as advanced as push notifications or something like that, but I think a report card system, as something that Numbers USA and a bunch of other groups do, I think we should definitely pursue, and we should definitely highlight these people and these candidates that we feel are America first. So I think that's a great question, and it's something we should certainly work on. So thank you for that. Thank you for both questions. And with that, that's it for Highly Respected this week. I hope you enjoyed hearing me talk for 50 so minutes. And we'll be back with another episode. We'll have a guest on, so be looking forward to that. And until next time, stay respected.